Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're so excited to join PSACON and talk a little bit about advancing open scholarship or open science through the Open Scholarship Knowledge Base. Our goals are to, one, talk a little bit about the broader principles of open science and how we're trying to apply them through the Open Scholarship Knowledge Base, or what we're calling OSKB. We are very interactive here, collaborative, so please feel free to unmute yourself, put questions in chat. We'll love to engage with you, and we actually have some questions that we've proposed after a brief presentation to try to spur collaborative discussion among everyone. So we'll just dive right into it. It's so excited to be here. I wanted to recognize and we wanted to let everyone know who is going to be joining us today to present. So Erin Buchanan is at the Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. Felix Henninger is from LMU Munich, and Michael Mallott is from Daytona State College. All of these individuals were key contributors and members of the OSKB community and part of the core development team as it was launched. So wealth of knowledge right here. Can definitely testify to that. One, in just really broad strokes, to talk a little bit about the OSKB, kind of the founding motivation was the realization that there is a ton of amazing scholarship out there, particularly around open science. The community is really dynamic and really vibrant, but it often is really hard to collaborate or really hard to find, to search, to locate so many different locations. So the OSKB, which is hosted by the Center for Open Science through a generous grant from the National Science Foundation, developed the OSKB Hub as a goal to try to help have a platform to bring everyone together. So its key attributes are: it is openly accessible, it is community driven and sustained by contributions from fellow scholars. We invite everyone to contribute, add new materials and ideas, and work with the larger community. If you want to follow along, if someone can, we'll go ahead and put this link into the chat feature. The OSKB, this is the interface, the hub that you will see. It is hosted by or supported by OER Commons. So if you want to walk along with us as we move forward, you can find the knowledge base right there. And our goals, just to highlight what we're going to do for this particular session, is one, we want to introduce the OSKB, the Open Scholarship Knowledge Base, so you understand what it is, what its missions are, provide a quick tutorial on how to use it, this functionality, what it offers, how you can maximize value, and then transition into a larger discussion that's going to include limits for all scholarship exchanges, including the OSKB. We know that we are absolutely in a process of learning and refining and improving. Never leave that stage completely, and really want to learn from the community and from you all primarily, and how we can in particular work to promote diverse voices and better serve the community. Didn't know you were going to be put to work, but we would love your input on any of those thoughts and ideas. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Erin to kind of dive in more deeply into the OSKB.
Thanks, Marcy. So I am tasked with the background here. So what is this open scholarship knowledge base that we've been talking about? And so we kind of have this nice tagline that it's a community of advocates. So really highlighting the community aspect of the knowledge base, who work with people like us, researchers, educators. We do both, librarians. We've had a lot of interest from librarians actually, but policymakers and anyone who's interested in open scholarship. Okay? And so we work together to build this knowledge base that other people can use and contribute to learn and how to apply open practices. So this field is moving very rapidly. I just think back to when I was taught how to PHAC, and then now it's just this crazy 10 years later advancing area. And so it's hard to keep track of where things are, right? So if you go on to the next slide, Marcy. And so I wanted to kind of break down the three parts to the OSKB. First, again, it's a community, a lot of diverse individuals, and we've worked really hard at the end. Michael's going to talk about how can we make this more diverse through people and the types of scholarship that we're using, really brought together by these shared goals of open practices and open education. So that's one of my big things too, is that a lot of this is meant to be open educational tools, either you're educating yourself or your students. It's also a project. So curating and sharing our knowledge about open scholarship so you can contribute by adding others' work or your own. And then the platform itself, which is hosted on OER Commons, which stands for Open Educational Resources, so a shared goal. And it's community-led by most of the folks you see here, where you can download, share, edit, upload your educational resources. Next slide, please. So a very, very brief history of what we've been doing over the last couple of years. I feel like this was kind of a SIPS accident several years ago, more than several maybe now, where Felix really led that charge. A lot of us got together and we're thinking about ways that we could promote and pull together open scholarship information. It's really morphed and changed a lot to open education in general, which I'm a big fan of. But its development was always to address these gaps in knowledge, where I follow this certain set of people on Twitter, and those are the only things I see, right? Or I only read these three journals, and so I've missed that biology is talking about the same thing. So how can we take all those different areas and pull them together so that we're all, learning from each other rather than reinventing the wheel over and over? Okay. And then also focusing on these barriers to adoption. We all know that some people are really hesitant to do these things, or they don't feel like they have time, or there are these different systemic issues that we may not be aware of because of the part of the world that we're in, that we just don't realize the reality of maybe somebody who's in Africa. And so how can we hear those voices and overcome some of these barriers to adopting open scholarship practices? And some of that is just making it more accessible to folks. So unpaywalling a bunch of ideas and concepts so they're not just in the journals that we read that are, blocked by what library you have. Next, please. And so what we've done over time, over many months, is thought about this from the community perspective. So we have a code of conduct, a metadata schema, which I think I saw Lisa in here, she would love, and really talk to a bunch of experts, librarians, people who've done this work before. OER Commons clearly has thought about this a lot. As you go into the hub, you'll see that it is more like US education system centric in a lot of its tags, but we've tried to really shift that in our little area of their library to make it less US centric. But if you're playing around in OER Commons, do know that you'll see stuff like K through 12, high school, math, biology. But we've tried to kind of overcome that limitation of their system. We've collected a bunch of resources and tagged those with metadata and uploaded them to our hub already. I think Marcy's going to talk about groups and how you access those data points. We've presented at conferences like this, a couple SIPS conference presentations now. We're hoping to present at AERA, which is the education group. So a bunch of different versions of this same talk to encourage people to join and to collaborate and really tell us what we're doing wrong, because you can't get better until you know what you've missed, right? We've taken that community feedback and tried to change things and updated what we've been doing based on that feedback, and then developed procedures for sharing and uploading, which I think Felix is going to talk about. So really tried to think about this from all three of those points: the community, who is going to be here and how do we help them, the project component of it, building the knowledge base, and the the system, the website that hosts that. But we can always do better. So I think one more. Do I have one more? I don't remember anyway. So here's the link, which we provided in the chat, which I think people have been going and coming. So I will copy it again real quick. You do have to have an account. Well, I'll try. I'm not very good at this. There we go. You do have to have an account on OER Commons, and you don't have to do stuff in our hub. So OER Commons is a giant library is the way they describe it, and we're like one wing of their library. They love this library analogy. And you can use OER across all of it. It is open on purpose, but we have a specific page that's set up for us that has all of our information and the data we've already set up. But you can use OER separately, okay? And the accounts are free. So once you join, one of the 4 or 5 of us will add you to the groups that are available, and then you can get started doing all the cool stuff people are going to show you next. So thank you. Happy to take questions, although I'm going to disappear because I'm double booked. But the other people on this team are well equipped to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. So I'm going to chime in here again and pick up on that library analogy that I do return to quite often, and talk a little bit about OSKB groups and community building. So using that analogy of the library, we envision the OSKB groups as the study tables, the collaboration space where people with like interests and like goals come together, share ideas, engage, share resources, and just sit and have a platform to bring people together. So that's the thinking there. Currently, as you can see, some of the groups that we have available, there are researchers with research interests, educators, policymakers, librarians, funders, publishers. And if you go to the OSKB link that has been posted in the chat and then go to a particular group, then you can click in the right-hand corner to join a group. And that will get you linked up to the other individuals that are there. And then once you join, you will be able to add, collaborate, contribute to the group, engage with it, make use of it. One of the things that we realized is we didn't want to just build a static exchange that was essentially a Google tool to get resources. We wanted this to be more, we wanted this to be bigger, and to really allow people to build off each other and bring a whole bunch of powerful minds together. So in addition to groups, what we are working is the development of smaller sub communities. And so far we have 2 of them, but we are consistently working with other groups and interest, people that suggest other communities. We'll be happy to work with them to tailor the interests for individuals. Right now, there's a group of researchers and educators dedicated to the science of aging. We often joke that aging science doesn't sound quite so great, like it's just old science, but we mean actually the science of the aging process. And then influenza research, support certainly a big topic of discussion with virus research going on, but those are very niche focused communities that are looking for other people with specific questions and that specific subset of knowledge to really be able to harness them, contribute, and find that niche information that they might not be able to find in such a concrete way without another offering. So now that you understand where you can engage, I'm going to step aside and let Felix talk about how you can contribute.
Thanks, Marcy. Yeah, and hi once more. So I think the OSKB is most of all a learning platform. So probably the most used feature on our landing page will be the search bar that can launch you right into the content. But I would also like to highlight the Add OER button, which allows everyone to share their own resources and add them to the shelves of the OSKB. So we would really like to invite folks to support everyone and support everybody's learning experience in this way. And what I would like to do briefly is just show you behind the scenes how this works, right? So if you come across a fancy new resource that flies by on your Twitter stream, there's a few steps we ask you to take before adding it to the OSKB, sorry. And for these, the most important one is a brief review checklist that just to make sure that things are in scope and that the license is correct. And most importantly, because all of the content on OER Commons needs to be Creative Commons licensed, and the site will take the information and try to create a summary of everything you pointed to, we need to make sure that if any content isn't CC licensed, that we create a summary or a brief representation of this resource so that we can add it to the library under the Creative Commons license. So that's, I think, the main hurdle to do, to keep in mind, and especially for the checklist, that this is something that we are super happy to help with. And so if folks are unsure, please do reach out and drop us an email. Yeah, so I think the next slide shows the checklist very briefly, and this is part of a resource that's also hosted on the OSKB. That's a small lesson you can go through, and I think this is step 3, that just makes sure that the resource is ready to be uploaded and checks again the scope and the license and the most important facts. And with this complete, I think yeah, you're invited to submit resources to the OSKB. And then I'd like to show you on the next slide these what happens behind the scenes. So because we are organized in these groups, and those groups are experts for their fields, and because this is a community organization, most of a brief review process happens within these small subgroups. And so the admin in every group will review any new submissions and maybe give some feedback around them. So I think the most important steps would be to revisit the group in which things are submitted, and possibly, depending on the scope, recommend that it be submitted to the OER Commons more broadly. And then there's a final check that happens in the OER Commons that's really only about the licensing. So they take one more look whether they want to have any specific resource in their system. And again, if there's something that happens here, which shouldn't, because the checklist makes sure of that at the beginning, this is something that we are super happy to even out. And with that, I think we would love to accept and add any more resources that you come across to the big library of the OSKB. Okay, thanks. I think over to you, Michael.
Hello all. So one of the things that attracted me to the OSKB was the intentionality behind inclusion, diversity, and we actually recently gave a presentation at the SIPS meeting discussing this very issue. And so during community calls, preparing for the presentation, and I should note, if you go to the homepage, there's an opportunity to sign up for these community calls. They're monthly meetings where we can discuss how to make the OSKB better, more diverse, more inclusive. But during these calls, we pull together a variety of stakeholders across the globe. And for the presentation, we discussed, what are the barriers that people experience in the Global South to including their voices in scholarship. And this is obviously not an exhaustive list of potential barriers, but I did want to highlight some of these to help frame our discussion in a moment, talking about what are some possible solutions to these barriers. I think a lot of them revolve around these participation challenges. The quality of the product, the quality of OSKB resources is really dependent upon the ability to get people to share content, to provide those links to these resources. And if we're limited in the people that we're pulling these resources from, then obviously that's going to limit the quality of the scholarship that we're able to share with others. And so the big thing that I think we've identified is just the fact that a lot of resources out there do not represent diverse views. And so we have to figure out what are the ways that we can reach out, what are the ways that we can remove barriers so that we are getting better representation of scholarship. So some of the barriers I think are obvious. Things like language. Often English is the default language, and obviously that can promote communication across a wide variety of individuals when there's a shared language that you can utilize, but it also inhibits the ability to share scholarship that is created. We're talking about like technical information that is created in a language other than English. How do we provide quality translations of that information? And then how can users outside of the sphere of the English language, how can they utilize resources that were produced in English for whatever, language that they need? And then just broader access issues, who has access to broadband? Certainly paywalls present a major obstacle. A lot of publications, there's a paywall, we're all familiar with this. And there's ways around those that we probably are familiar with, but unfortunately, that does pose a major obstacle to people across the globe in accessing information and then sharing that information. In terms of financial support, this can manifest itself in a variety of ways, but obviously with broadband, you may not have the financial means to have access to broadband or to publications that you need to produce your works. But in other ways, software, you may not have the means to acquire software that allow you to do the things you want. Statistical analyses, thankfully, there are some great open options for that, but historically that's been a major issue for people too. And then in our discussion, the presentation, I think one of the things that I noted was the perception that people from the global south or in communities that aren't traditionally represented in major publications, for instance, the belief that there is this that their ideas aren't important, that somehow their interests in the global south somehow do not apply to the rest of us around the globe, whereas people from the global north, particularly the Western Hemisphere, well, of course, if you're doing research, then it must be relevant to everybody. And so how do we break down that perception, that barrier that I think is very real, and that inhibits people from sharing? If you don't think that your voice is important, then why would you try to reach out? How can we improve? How can we eliminate these biases that may prevent people from sharing in these scholarship exchanges? And I think that's where we're going to go with this presentation next is, what are the actionable steps that we can take to improve the climate and improve the quality of scholarship exchanges? And so we have a few questions that I think all of us can kind of share with us. We have a few questions that we wanted to help, like I said, frame the discussion around this. And part of it is, our own perceptions, people who've been working in the OSKB, but we really want to invite discussion and participation. What do you guys think in terms of what are the ways that we can be effective at breaking down some of these biases, removing some of these obstacles, increasing inclusion? What are the things that you look for personally in resources that you are seeking, scholarship in a wide variety of ways? So the first one we have is, how can we ensure that inclusivity is part of what we do and is at the forefront of what we do?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to, to joke that sometimes you hear the field of dreams strategy of if you build it, they will come, but it does not apply, in this context. So kind of trying to, show some humility and understanding that we want to be responsive and we want to build something that is actually serving the needs of communities.
And what I will say, Marcy, is I've been really encouraged by the diversity of voices that we have in these community calls. It's really impressive to see voices from across the globe, different areas like we had mentioned, librarians, educators, researchers, a wide variety of voices. But still, as you mentioned, it's still difficult because, we want to represent as many voices as possible.
One of
Absolutely.
the insights that came out of the de-weirding session earlier on was we were meeting with a lot of researchers in Southeast Asia, and they were indicating that language barriers are sort of huge for them, and that there's a desire to incorporate some of this knowledge and training into coursework, but the students may not feel as comfortable learning the material in English, or might not feel as motivated. And that was a really interesting insight that I was previously unfamiliar with. And I wonder to what extent those conversations have been happening at OSKB.
They've definitely been happening. I mean, we are working on translating high value resources in other languages to ensure that it is better represented, that language representation is there, and then exploring translation services. And that's one of the things that we had hoped to gather from different parties is, are there translation services that people are using that seem to be good? I know that it's challenging because we're talking about technical material that often uh, there's a major obstacle in how that gets translated, but certainly we've been talking about, identifying those high value topics, those high value resources, and then getting that translated so that it is available. I don't know if there's any more you wanted to add to that, Marcy.
No, just sort of emphasizing that and trying to diversify our voice in the representation, both on the resources that are uploaded and in the community calls. So we want that scholarship to be representative, and then are working, as Mike was saying, to assemble what we're calling, a collaborative team of language advocates that can there support and inform translation services, and get a hold and a strategy of where to start, where the highest impact in translation services, where that can be yielded. So if you'd like to participate, please let us know.
I wonder to what extent it's fruitful to explore community-driven translation, which is how I've seen a lot of other cross-linguistic projects sort of emerge, especially in the midst of funding constraints. And so I've seen sort of like open science Coursera's that are translated into dozens of languages. And when I asked the people, there's like, oh yeah, there was someone who really liked it and thought, I think other people would like this, but they might not speak English, so I'm going to just translate it for you. And so I wonder to what extent that could be useful, because I'm starting to learn that there are these pockets, like these sort of journal clubs and all of these, all around the world, who are interested in sort of developing this scholarship. And I wonder if they might have the time, resources, and/or motivation to lead up some of the translations themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge groundswell of support, and it is so appreciated for people that are willing, to engage in that work, and then trying to get financial support for it. But then, also realizing that we don't want to overburden certain members of one community, or, constantly rely on them, to do this work, when they have other important things to do as well. And so, while that might work for, certain resources on a systematic basis of trying to get this launched and move forward, broadly, how do you do that on a wider scale? So some other questions that we had that we would love to continue the discussion forward is just posed to the audience is that, you know, where do you go for resources? We would love to hear. We recognize that many of you probably have never heard about the OSKB. And one of the things we're trying to do with discussions like this is to, you know, spread awareness and learn. But what do you like about the sources you go to? Why do you go to them? Why do you trust them?
And I think the other part to that is maybe not necessarily a specific resource, but what are the things you're looking for in those resources? What makes those resources that you want to go back to? Yeah, I think the personal network in the chat, talking about personal network, I think is helpful. And then I think that also points to why it's so important to expand the diversity of voices so that that network, you're drawing upon a wide variety of voices. I know that that's been my challenges, you know, in my limited network, it's almost like an echo chamber. I'm getting the stuff that I regularly get in contact with. I want stuff that I don't regularly see. And so that's the challenge is how do I break out of that network? How do I break out of my own little world so that I am getting different views and different types of resources that I normally would get on a day-to-day basis? But I would say I've found lots of valuable stuff from that network.
Hi, okay if I jump in with a point or a question. Sorry, my name is Phil, and I work at University of Glasgow, Psych and Neuroscience, and yeah, it's just kind of the question on the screen. I guess we've sort of developed our own stuff, which we're having a quick look in the background. So fortunately, we're already on your system, which is really cool. It makes us feel good. So we created the SciTeachR stuff that is kind of, because we've been, over the past 4 or 5 years, really trying to redevelop how we teach data skills and knowledge about data with our students. So we went back to basics and built our own stuff and built our own textbooks. And I kind of think there's some really good examples within the kind of, I'm struggling with your acronym for some reason. I do not know why, but you know your own acronym, right? There seems really good resources in it. And I don't know if you know the FORT group as well, FORRT, Sam Parsons and Flavio. Yeah, and I think both of them are really good. And the thing that I always think would be really beneficial would be like, I don't know if you've tried it, but like a weekly email that just gets like a random resource out in my face every week sort of thing, because that's how I sort of have picked up things, you know, because if I go on Twitter, it's just the people like you've said I've only ever seen sort of thing. But if I'm not going to pick up the random stuff that's on Twitter, but if it's like a random generated thing that just pings out, here's a quick tutorial on something, you know, I'm maybe going to go, sorry, Lisa's also on my screen from Glasgow. I'm going to go, hey, Lisa, did you see this? And then we develop it and we take it into kind of what we're doing sort of thing. So it's kind of, I think maybe with Twitter and our own ability to choose our own kind of social networks to some degree, we may have lost that randomness that helped us generate ideas in the first place. And I guess, I don't know if you've just kind of ever thought of that or something along those ideas.
It's a great idea. Yeah. So what we do have is a monthly newsletter, but can sort of tailor that and would invite everyone to, you know, to sign up and join. But it provides information about the OSKB and related topics. And then one of them has what we call an OSKB Spotlight, you know, on resources. So I know both for Mike and Felix, a plug out to them. You know, we've highlighted resources that they've contributed, and then, you know, over the last year, you know, just one, you know, really intriguing resource that's been recently added, but kind of do that in a more, you know, either through, we started a Twitter account, which is at OSKB_COS, but kind of do that. So please follow us there, but do that in a more consistent fashion, you know, through social media.
Yeah, I think like I used to, when we were developing our stuff, I would kind of heavily get stuff from Twitter and get inspiration from Twitter. I sort of stepped away from it for a little bit because everyone was just like talking about how the world's burning sort of thing. I was like, I need a break from this, you know? So, and I apologize to everyone that's telling me I shouldn't be using email anymore. But yeah, I know, I think something that just kind of gets the ideas back in front of people and gets them talking about it, but stops them just kind of looking at their own ideas or their own kind of things they're interested that day. Do you know, it's sort of like the equivalent of turning up to a random seminar and being inspired by the idea because it was just the randomness of it that leads you down another path sort of thing. But yeah, that was just kind of how I like to get ideas.
Sure.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Asking for, so I think using social media has helped a lot with stuff when I've had questions in the past. But one of the things that I think, at least in some circles that I'm in, is like how unfriendly those spaces are to people. And, you know, people aren't going to stick out unwelcoming spaces just on principle. They're going to leave. And so some examples are, you know, Facebook groups where there are a lot of experts who can answer questions, but if somebody asks a question and it's not in perfect English, like they will get shamed. And that makes people not want to ask questions and not want to post things. And, you know, if you ask them to cool it, like that's, you know, violating their whatever. So I don't think we do a good job of recognizing how many people we lose just by having by not having, I guess, a zero tolerance policy for that stuff, by not kind of saying in these spaces, this isn't, you know, you can't talk to people like this. These are people who are asking genuine questions and everybody's background is a little different. And this comes from like many experiences of being in spaces where like people have left. I can't tell you how many times I have had people in these groups like explain to me statistics. And I'm like, just click on my profile.
Yeah.
I mean, like explain like a t-test or something like that. And it's yeah. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think it's an important issue.
Very much so, because you're absolutely right. I mean, why would you want to contribute? Why would you want to share when people are shutting you down right away? It's like, well, then you don't value my contribution. I'm not seen as an equal, so why would I want to participate in this? I think it's a huge issue with social media.
Out of curiosity, just like a, you know, thumbs up reaction to everyone in the crowd, like how many have a social media account or a Twitter account here today? Seems like a, you know, a good number. And it's really hard because I think all the points are really made, but you can see the variety across here that, you know, if it is, it would be, you know, one plank in a strategy, you know, for resources that it's kind of difficult not to support it and engage with it in some way. But it's not the end all be all for reaching out by any means.
But if we are talking about diversity, obviously there are some people who don't have any social media, as mentioned in the chat. So we have to find those different ways of reaching out.
Can I chip in a little bit? Hi, I'm Nadia Corral. I'm a researcher in Mexico, and I think that's something that I've come across a lot. That I have Twitter, and I have networks in other countries. So I do get some. They've talked about how like sometimes it becomes an echo chamber that you start hearing people that you usually hear from. But for me, Twitter has been very fruitful because we have, I follow people that aren't necessarily within my my field all the time. However, there are a lot of my graduate students and a lot of my undergraduate students don't have Twitter or don't have the same social media. So what I end up doing is I look at all of these cool resources that I see on Twitter or other places, and I end up either texting them to them. That here in Mexico, there's a lot of use of WhatsApp, and that's what a lot of people use to even do science. I don't currently have it anymore, but that's a whole nother issue. And so I either text it through phone or it's through other academic, we use Teams in our institution. So it does become hard because not everybody has access to the same social media, but also the language barrier is a huge thing. All of our grad students should know English, but sometimes they don't feel as comfortable either sharing or reading things that are not in their preferred language. But also, I think one of the things that's important here is because sometimes we don't, some students, I feel comfortable and I feel welcome in a lot of places, but a lot of students don't. And I think that's one of the things that needs to change. Like, why would anybody want to hear from me? I'm from like Mexico, like, no, and I think it's something that's been told to us, like, oh, you're from Mexico, like the science that you do doesn't really matter. So it's not generalizable to the rest of the population. And it's like, well, is it not though? So I think there's a few issues there of access and inclusion, and making sure that it is important to have awareness, but it's also important to have to making people feel welcome, especially the younger generations. And I think that's one of the things that I've tried to do to try to kind of push them, including PSA, to like, your voice matters. It's important that you're part of this.
100%, absolutely. And I'm just following the chat, like those words are completely hurtful. And that's why I think it's incumbent upon us, going back to that field of dreams strategy, like if you build it, they will come. Incumbent upon us, not just to make it available, but to make it welcoming and to extend an invitation. If there is a barrier or a hesitation to engage, don't put that on, all of the other scholars to overcome that barrier. I think that also needs to be placed on us to say, what efforts can we make to bridge that? How can we explicitly make an invitation and demonstrate that? And I also had a question for everyone. Love the engagement around social media, just around how deeply do you feel that you can engage with a resource on social media? Is that like you'll see a link to an article and read it? Have you had success like engaging with an author, asking a question, getting feedback? Is it more of just that one-way stream?
I have particularly asked for papers, like that's another issue for us in Mexico, that we don't have access to all of the journals. And so Twitter has helped me in some ways where I can just ask, hey, I don't have access to your paper, do you mind sharing? And people have been super responsive, which is like the comment of like down with email. It's super quick and people just like send, like most of us just want to share our papers. We want them to be out there. So it's been really quick at getting papers back, and especially it's really nice to like see, oh, this is just like hot and new, and people just are tweeting and like doing like short summaries of it, and it's like, oh, this would be super cool for me, but then you click on it and then it's like behind a paywall and then you can't access it. And usually it's super quick and people, it's fairly responsive.
Marcy, I had a comment. It's like one step backwards, but I hope that it's still useful and relevant. we've had a lot of discussions in the PSA about similar issues. And one proposal that has come up a few times and has been relatively well received, but never implemented, is this idea of creating country-specific community outreach groups, or if not country-specific, region-specific. And there's a few like really interesting ideas behind this, and one of them is to sort of give people in PSA like that formal recognition of like, we do think that research in Mexico is really important, and that reaching out to our colleagues in Mexico is really important. And so we want a formal position where that happens. And so this is an idea that I feel like has been kicked around quite a bit, and I think it's been relatively well received by the leaders in the PSA. And I think that we've just sort of ended up stopping short of like actual implementation as we sort of try to figure out some of the details, such as like, okay, well, how do you get into that position? Surely, like, we could sort of select people initially, but ideally this, could actually be somewhat of a democratic process. How do we have the resources to arrange that democratic process? What sorts of, autonomy versus, support would groups like this need? So I think there's a lot of value in that idea. I think it could also be helpful here, but there's just some, difficult logistical issues that have to be figured out in order to implement it in a, equitable and productive manner.
Sure. I'd also like to invite, Felix to chime in, coming from have you heard of anything similar, Felix, to those country-specific outreaches?
That's a great idea. I don't think I can speak for the international community more widely. So in Germany, there are a few local networks that I think also try to stick to the German language. Yeah, so there are folks kind of trying to coordinate and share experiences and materials here, but I'm sorry, beyond that, I don't think I have a good perspective on what's going on. But maybe just as a brief comment on the if you build it, they will come mantra that you mentioned and rightly dismissed. I think maybe I really like the points that several of you raised about using different media and going out to folks, not only just having an inviting platform, but maybe kind of changing the platform and adjusting to it to where folks are and folks could be reached and could be we could have a conversation.
Absolutely. And also to the international outreach idea, one of the ideas around groups and community formation that we've kicked around but haven't been able to implement with the OSKB just yet is forming sub-communities within the platform for researchers and educators, scholars, that want to affiliate and join and have that interaction. So would be entirely supportive of that. If there are people who would like to participate in that, propose a community, invite collaborators, that would be a wonderful outreach opportunity. And concentrate on scholarship from that region or that country.
Well, and I think that's a way to promote a welcoming environment, is to also say, hey, even if your scholarship is related to some specific area, or to some specific group, we want to have a community for that group because your voice is important. Just because it doesn't apply to some broad, community of scholars doesn't mean it's not important. And we want to have that space where we're welcoming all these different voices, even if it is specific to some group.
I think I'm Helena. I'm from the School of Psychology as well in the University of Glasgow. there might be a call for something like country champions, where local communities could work on extracting what things are important for them and what they use and how they use it, but then to kind of feed back to a partner elsewhere about just what it is that's useful and what the gaps are, what are the missing things that they need, or because it's a bit pointless foisting things on people if they're not going to use it. From your perspective, it's kind of like it needs to come from their perspective what they're going to use. And your resource, you've got a huge amount of resources. So it's kind of like, this is the first time I actually looked at it and I'm like, oh, where do I start? But it will be even more difficult for somebody else who is new to it and who might not know that need. So it's almost like a partnership kind of thing, where different people could come together and talk about those kinds of things. And it doesn't have to be, somebody from the global north and the global south to working together. It could be people from different countries, basically in any kind of capacity. But it's sort of like bringing those conversations of, in my culture we need this, and in my culture we need that, and what's not being represented, and that builds up a better picture of how these things interrelate with each other. Maybe just a suggestion.
Yeah, 100%. And that kind of takes us right into some of our next thoughts and questions that we had that you raised about limitations that you found, and just back to the point of gaps. We've covered that to some degree, but I'd love thoughts.
I think one concern that we've had in the PSA is that the PSA, I think, grew far quicker than most people anticipated. And I think that it quickly sort of became seemingly unmanageable. And that can be challenging as far as like actually having an organization that runs sort of efficiently. If everyone's just sort of off doing their own thing, things can just sort of seem chaotic and out of control, and you can create all sorts of weird bureaucratic bottlenecks when you don't have a clear structure in place. And I think that's been one of the biggest challenges in the PSA when we think about drastically expanding how we do our outreach, is that we already have a pretty big beast on our hand, and no one's really paid to tame it. And so this idea of like letting it run even more wild can be a little scary. And I definitely feel that, when ideas get pitched to me, I sometimes vacillate between being like, just do it, and like, whatever, it's going to be kind of messy, and but we should, it's important to do it. So we'll sort through the mess later. But then I have my other days where I'm a little bit more conservative and I say, we need to perfect what we're doing first before we try to expand upon it. And we haven't perfected our current system. So I expand it. So that's been a constant source of tension for me as someone who's like in that position to make a lot of decisions on behalf of the organization. And I guess time will tell whether we've been too conservative or too expansive in our approach to building the network.
I think that speaks to grassroots support, though, in building. There's no one model, one size fits all. It's, letting it organically unfold and happen, and advance a little bit, reassess, keep moving forward at each point, and letting the community lead. Yeah, I'm just reading through the comments. This is loving all these ideas.
One capability that I'm reading the question now, and one capability that we've sought out, but not been able to quite find is this capability of actually tracking what the organization is doing. Similar to a lot of grassroots organizations, we don't really know who's presenting on PSA materials. We don't have a good index of the extent to which people are reusing our data or maybe using it for training purposes. we could very easily figure out how much media coverage we have, but we don't systematically do that. And so that's something that like every few months someone gets really motivated and like we're gonna revamp it, we're gonna have a PSA CV and everyone's going to contribute to it, and we're gonna know what's going on. And then people are like, oh my God, this is really hard. Let's just expand and do things and not worry about actually tracking it. But then when it comes, you know, to actually having to go to a funder and explain what we do, that's when it always bites us. And it's like, oh shoot, I actually don't know how many presentations have been based off PSA work. I don't know how many people are like actively reading our newsletters in various languages. Well, actually, we only have one language, so that's an easier question. But you know, little things like that, we're not always systematically tracking things as we go. That's a capability that we've tried to build up a few times. But what we've sort of always resorted to is like, yeah, when we need the information, we'll do this like quick sprint to the finish line and try to gather it. But in doing so, we create a lot of stress, and we just haven't been able to build that infrastructure to not make it a sprint.
Yes. Sprint indeed, and messy democracies indeed as well. Just wanted to give a moment to see if there are any other comments, some space.
I think one of the other things, and this might be my last comment because I have class, one of the other things that we've seen part of the diversity committee is we have had problems reaching out to some people. Like when we started trying to include people from, example, Latin America, there was an email that went out from the PSA email, and we didn't receive a lot of responses. But once I started emailing people directly from my personal email, we started having a little bit more of a response. And I think it's part of the same thing of like either not enough like awareness from people, like knowing like what is this PSA thing and why are they emailing us, and but also of like cultural things of like having more personal invitations versus just like, oh, here's this thing. And like there's a lot of like phishing and emails of like, oh, like here, come and like write to this journal and just pay us 500 euros, and you're like, well, what is this thing? So I think we need to pay attention to like culturally different invitations and making sure that we're including people in those diverse ways that people might want to be reached out in. It's not just a language barrier, but I think it's also like a cultural barrier of like how we can reach out to people. And I speak for me and maybe other people, but like we've been excluded so many times that it feels weird to be included now. Like why are you trying to include me now? So I think that's something that needs to be taken into account, and also like think about how you are going to approach people, because it's like, okay, well, what's the catch? I give you data and then I can use the data and you're going to include me, but I don't get it. So I think that's something that needs to be reflected upon, and something that we all kind of need to talk about.